Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. This will be a little bit of a contentious stream, so I really hope to get myself in order and to present it in a way that is most appealing to as many of you as possible. I will not try to in any way hide my real opinion here or basically lie to you in Apple sheep fashion what I believe Apple is in the right or not, because I do believe that Apple is in the wrong here for the most part, which is quite untypical for a person who was very much against the lawsuit by Epic Games and others. My problems here are manifold, and I will try to go into them with as much detail as possible. I don't know how long I will make this stream, given the simple fact that it's still in development. It's still over a month until the law comes into actual effect. Until then, Apple has presented basically their view of this law by the European Union, and I highly suspect that the European Union will hit them back over the next month and tell them that they interpreted it the wrong way. So there's a lot I want to talk about. I do want to have a nuanced conversation about site loading in general. I do want to have a general discussion on what this law means and what I believe is the correct interpretation for it. I do believe that Apple does have some wiggle room here, though it's by no means as absolute as Apple might make it out to be. I don't know how confident I feel yet, because a lot of my opinion has been developing a lot over the last 24 hours, and I usually try to have a more long-term take, but this is something that has changed a lot since basically the facts have come into effect, and I do want to give my opinion on this early stage in the discussion. Beyond that, I'm streaming from a somewhat different area than usual, so if there are technical problems or anything else like that, please let me know. I highly doubt that I will be able to fix that much, but hey, at least the video and audio seems to be working all right for now. As always, I encourage you guys to join the chat. I know most of you like to comment afterwards. I know most of my video views happen after the live stream. This is something I really wanted to make into a live stream, though, give people a chance to join if they feel like it, or if not, then it's just a long-term discussion with myself basically, which does give me some opportunity to collect my thoughts as well. Beyond that, if you like this channel, if you like the content I create, if you want to see more of this, please like, subscribe, share, all the YouTube jazz as I call it. For direct support, you can find my Patreon link in the description of this channel. You can follow me on Twitter to engage more directly with me there. And beyond that, there's also, while you're in the live chat, there are things such as super chats and super stickers. If you just want to give a small donation, make sure that your message is read. If you feel like it, if you have the means, please do so. But in general, I appreciate any kind of support you guys are giving this channel. We have grown quite a lot. I'm very grateful for that. Trying to grow the streams as well. So let's see if that works out in the end. I know it's kind of an European specific issue, and my European viewership is almost non-existent, so let's see how that pans out. At first, I wanted to start with something simple and pretty basic. What is this actually all based on, right? Why is Apple changing their App Store rules and guidelines so drastically? Why are they basically allowing site loading and third-party marketplaces in the European Union? What's that all about, basically? Well, it's all about the Digital Markets Act, and this is actually an explanation directly from the European Union. So basically, the Digital Markets Act is all about a more competitive structure for the digital world. The European Union believes there are such as entities as gatekeepers, which means they are big and they control the distribution of apps, games, and other digital services on a wide array of hardware, operating systems, apps, etc. and they designate them to be core platform services. Now, this is very important because core platform services do not mean to be monopolies. I've seen a lot of people use the excuse that Apple is not a monopoly, right? iOS does not hold even a majority market share in Europe, so how can it be designated as a core platform service? Basically, due to revenue guidelines and market share guidelines, iOS and especially the App Store in iOS do meet those criteria. So don't come at me with the excuse that Apple is not a monopoly. This is not how this law works. Antitrust law is not just written for monopolies, it's also written for large companies and in general companies overall. So Apple does fit the description in many ways, not in all ways, as we'll see a little later on, but in some other major ways. They also say search engines can be a core platform service, especially Google with how large it is. Application stores, of first and foremost the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. Messenger services, which is the one exception to core platform services for Apple, because iMessage does not meet the market share criteria for being a core platform service in terms of messaging services, but for example WhatsApp does. Gatekeepers will have to comply with the do's, which are obligations, and don'ts, i.e. prohibitions, listed in the Digital Markets Act. So we actually have quite a nice breakdown of what those companies are supposed to do, and later on we'll be going through Apple's own explanation of what is changing for iOS users and iOS developers to make sure we understand how they are planning to comply with this extensive legislation. I will not be going into the actual letter of the law. I'll be working with those breakdowns. I'm not a lawyer, I'm the son of lawyers though, but that doesn't magically, through osmosis, gives me law analysis powers. Maybe I'll react at some point to some legal expert who analyzes this, but for now, let's work with the breakdown. First of all, they have to allow third parties to interoperate with the gatekeeper's own services in certain specific situations. This is actually interesting. It depends a little bit on the actual service here, right? Apple, for example, had to open up NFC core services on iOS, which means you will be able to install services besides Apple Pay into the Wallet app. And that is one example of how Apple allows interoperability. But one better example for that is what will happen to messaging services such as WhatsApp, which will have to allow other messengers to basically to do what Beeper tried to do with iMessage, right? And that basically become like an extra client for WhatsApp, or even better, integrated directly into already existing solutions. Allow their business users to access the data they generate in their use of the gatekeeper's platform. That's pretty self-explanatory, though the details there are very specific to the actual companies. For Apple, it's mainly like app downloads, app usage, and stuff like that. Provide companies advertising on their platform with the tools and information necessary for advertisers and publishers to carry out their own independent verification of their advertisements hosted by the gatekeeper. Again, Apple is not big into advertising themselves, but this also goes into data sharing. This is, though, very important for the likes of Google, which usually prioritize themselves when it comes to their own ads over other companies. Allow their business users to promote their offer and conclude contracts with their customers outside the gatekeeper's platform. Now, this is very important for Apple because obviously in-app purchases or just in general App Store purchases are done through Apple services. And then when you go inside the app, they're also done through Apple services, right? IAP in-app purchases. And this allows basically developers, this is something that is already happening in other regions such as Japan Japan, or the United States, you will be able to offer like an outside link and pay there. Now, there is some controversy here whether or not this deserves to be still be subject over the App Store Commission or other commissions collected by other providers such as the Google Play Store. But currently, this is how Apple interprets this section. This is being a little different than, for example, the ability to host like third-party marketplaces, because those are completely separate from the App Store. This would basically enforce the App Store to support third-party payment services. Example of the don'ts: gatekeepers will, for example, no longer do this. They will no longer treat services and products offered by the gatekeeper itself more favorably in ranking than similar services or products offered by third parties on the gatekeeper's platform. It remains to be seen how much they will actually enforce this in detail. Usually you do see first-party solutions on the top, like in search results on their stores. Maybe that will change, but overall I don't think this will be such a big deal for Apple. I mean, you could argue that like Apple Arcade is integrated directly into the App Store, and Apple Music is obviously baked in directly into the Music app. Those could be problems, but I don't really see that. Most experts that I've heard talk about this don't really complain about this. It's mostly like Spotify complaining about this, but Spotify complains about everything. Prevent consumers from linking up to businesses outside their platforms. This goes hand in hand with this regulation. Prevent users from uninstalling and pre-installed software app if they wish so. This will not hurt Apple too much, because for a long time they've used a lot of, for a while they've allowed a lot of uninstalling of pre-installed apps. So this is quite helpful here for them, that they've done a little bit of groundwork on this. Track end users outside of the gatekeeper's core platform service for the purpose of targeted advertising. Again, this has very little to do with Apple. Apple is not an advertising machine the way Meta and Google are. Without effective consent having been granted, that especially is important with Meta, which does not like to ask for consent on anything. To ensure that the new gatekeeper rules keep up with the fast pace of digital markets, the Commission will carry out market investigations. This is important in my opinion, because they will not accept like blank statements from companies on this. They will very much investigate how they are enforcing those legislations, and this is why I believe that Apple has brought out their solution a full month, because this actually goes into effect, because Apple will very much be, I believe, in non-compliance with several of those things, and they want to start like negotiating a little bit with the EU rather than fully complying from the get-go. So what will the Commission be able to do? Qualify companies as gatekeepers. So if a company basically becomes relevant enough from a market share or revenue perspective, they can become a gatekeeper and then become subjects to these do's and don'ts. They will update dynamically the obligations for gatekeepers when necessary. This is very important. This legislation is actually very broad, and it's subject to updates with little to no hurdles almost, especially given the current composition of the European Union. So I fully believe that even if technically Apple complies with how it's written, right, they can just very easily add some details there and put Apple into non-compliance if they are very maliciously only enforcing those legislations. Design remedies to tackle systemic infringement of the Digital Market Act rules. The European Union does have some like punishments here in terms of like daily or annual revenue from the company. So this can be quite punitive. So the fines can be up to 10% of the company's total worldwide annual turnover, or up to 20% in the event of repeated infringements. For Apple, obviously, those numbers are absolutely colossal, though I never expect them to ever hit like the full 10%. Periodic penalty payments can be up to 5% of the average daily turnover, and remedies can be in case of systemic infringement of the DMA obligations by gatekeepers. Additional remedy may be imposed on the gatekeepers after market investigations. The remedies will need to be proportionate. remains to be seen how Europe interprets that. If necessary, and as a last resort option, non-financial remedies can be imposed. This can include behavioral and structural remedy, i.e. the divestiture of parts of a business. This is the most important thing here. In theory, the chance that it would ever go so far that, for example, Apple would just be blocked out of the European Union, right? That ain't happening. It's too big of a market. Apple will comply with whatever they have to keep like France, Germany, Spain, Italy, and all those countries in their business. But what could happen, now granted that is still a very small chance, but this is a remedy if like the EU gets really, really pissed, is they could force Apple to completely divest from the App Store, for example, and then the App Store would have to be handled or at least sold even to another entity that then handles it and is basically independent from Apple. So Apple could basically collect money from that sale of the App Store, which would be an absolutely huge deal for any company, but then they would lose that long-term like revenue source in the European Union. There is one last thing here, and that goes into what does this mean for gatekeepers? They've actually, I believe they've had here something about the gatekeepers overall, right? Right. So we can actually look into who the gatekeepers are. They actually sorted them nicely by Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, ByteDance, which is the TikTok company, Meta, and Microsoft. Bad Wolfie, does your parliament said something about the Apple new rules? No. For one, they published it only yesterday, which was a Thursday. And second, it doesn't happen that fast. It's not like the parliament themselves like goes deeply into what Apple did. Their own lawyers will go into something that will be going into pretty soon. But by the way, Bad Wolfie, great to see you here. I really appreciate the contribution to the discussion. Keep the questions and comments going. I would expect though the European Union to have a response to them to like in 2 weeks. Maybe it will take longer, but I would be surprised by that. So Alphabet, when you actually look at it, right, Alphabet's obviously the Google parent company. So Google as the search engine, Chrome as a browser, Google Android as a platform, Google Search, YouTube. This is all impacted, including their distributions services, Google Maps, Google Play, and Google Shopping, which is interesting. Amazon is the Amazon Marketplace, Amazon overall. Obviously, Amazon does not have as many side businesses in that regard. Then Apple is the App Store, Safari, and iOS. I'm actually surprised to see Safari here. I kind of assumed that the market share from the mobile version kind of moved this because Safari usually does not get too high of a desktop market share. And then from ByteDance, it is just as TikTok social media service. From Meta, this is where we start with Facebook, and then with messengers we get to WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger, and I believe it's and then yeah, Meta basically as the web. What is ADS here actually? Like, is it just like the distribution platform or whatever? Yeah, because Meta does sell stuff, right? There's the Facebook Marketplace. Wait, no, that is the Facebook Marketplace. Now I'm confused actually what this is. But again, this is the overall like bigger companies inside. Even though Facebook inside Meta, do they even call it Facebook at all anymore, or is everything just Meta about them? And then Microsoft is Windows PC, the operating system, nothing else though. That will be advertising, I suppose. What do you mean with advertising? I don't have ads on this video. Or oh, ads, right. I thought this was like ADS. Yeah, that makes sense. Oh my God, I'm so stupid. Thank you, Wolfie. That makes sense because Google is a huge ad distribution platform. I didn't think of Amazon as an ad distribution system, but yeah, it absolutely makes sense. Also with their like cloud services, they have quite a huge impact in general. And then Meta as also a huge advertisement distributor. And for Microsoft there's also LinkedIn, which I always forget is part of Microsoft, but yeah. Yeah, so for Apple, it's not actually that much, right? It's App Store, it's Safari, and it's iOS. With Safari, we'll actually come to it very much with the deeper breakdown, because now we have to go into how is Apple choosing to enforce these things, right? So this is actually on Apple's website. It's in their newsroom. It's pretty big deal. There are also explanatory like subsections for developers on these things. They go into more detail, like the fees that developers would have to pay if they go outside the App Store, for example, and how the new commission structure works. Now, I do have everything in my head already, so I'll try not to basically push too many facts at once. It could get a little too much, but I will go into detail into what Apple is doing, right? So they're basically saying, for one, the DMA poses this to EU user, right? With new risks involved, new rules and everything. So Apple actually puts it into quite a negative context. And basically with iOS 17.4 in 27 EU countries starting in March, they will be following the guidelines according to them of the DMA. And with that, we'll also see stuff like changes to iOS, the App Store, Safari, and more. So, and Apple actually is actually going pretty much according to the website, right? Apple is going very smartly here, right? Look, they have changes to iOS, they have changes to Safari, and they have changes to the App Store, right? And if you actually look at what is designated as gatekeeper portions of Apple, there's the App Store, there's Safari, there's iOS, right? So it's pretty much exactly following this. So let's start with the App Store, because I believe this is the most impactful one, and it is the one that has the biggest risks for Apple to actually see some of the remedies and punishments from the EU that we've outlined before, be it revenue or even full divestiture. But so what are they changing with the App Store? For one, there are new options for using payment service providers. This is going one by one with what the European Union has said. So within a developer's app to process payment, it's for digital goods and services. Apple now allows basically external links. They still want to collect a commission from it. So this is how they interpret this, right? So we'll actually go through that, right? We'll start with the App Store, and that is external payment providers, right? So this is basically okay, but asking a commission. Why cannot I write from this perspective at all? So this is where some of the beef starts. New options for processing payments via link out. By the way, this can work as both a link out and inside the app as well. Business planning tools. I don't see much of a problem with any of these specific things. The changes also include new steps to protect and inform EU users, include App Store product page labels that informs users. So there is actually quite a lot of extra information that Apple is trying to provide both to consumers and developers. I also don't see DMA EU. I'll call this basically my controversies sheet, right? So I don't have to write down every single thing, but only the things that I believe could get Apple into trouble. In-app disclosure sheets let users know when they're no longer transacting with Apple. This is also to protect them, but they will write it in a pretty scary way so that users feel less inclined to use external payment providers. New app review processes to verify that developers accurately communicate information about transactions. Again, this is a little bit of like Apple also making sure that there's still some quality control there, but with external stuff, Apple will have significant drawbacks for users, which does make sense. I do not see this as some kind of anti-competitive practice. It just happens to be a downside of this. There's expanded data portability on Apple's data and privacy side. Again, a lot more data basically to work with for consumers and developers alike. But so this is a but for consumers that I believe consumers should know about, but I do not believe this will actually get them into trouble in terms of law. For apps that use alternative payment processing, Apple will not be able to issue refunds. Makes sense because it's not money they hold themselves, and will have less ability to support customers encountering issues. Also makes sense. They do not have insight into the payments happening through an external server. Scams or fraud, basically if the link is fraudulent, they could force the developer to take down the link or something like that. But again, it's not money Apple holds. So I guess they could like give you the commission back that the developer took or had to pay to Apple, but yeah, that ain't happening either. Helpful App Store features like reported problem, family sharing, and ask to buy. Those are all, by the way, incredible features, especially family sharing, and one of the foundational reasons why I choose to subscribe to anything that I can through the App Store. Those will be missing because obviously they are not subject to Apple's rules the way those payments happen. Users have to share their payment information with additional parties. Again, depending on the party, it's probably not such a big deal, but in general, usually people try to give those kinds of information to as few parties as possible. So that could lead to the theft of sensitive financial information. And on the App Store, users' purchase history and subscription managing will only reflect transaction made using App Store in the purchase system. This has an impact on people managing like their kids stuff, for example. So if you really have integrated everything into the App Store, into Apple services, this will basically take a lot of your information away that you could have otherwise had. There are also new business terms for apps in the EU. This will be for developers. Let's first go to Safari here. Where is it? Changes to the App Store. Changes to iOS. Let's start with iOS here. So it starts with third-party marketplace, and this is the most important thing that I believe could get Apple into deeper trouble. New options for distributing iOS apps from alternative marketplaces. I'll use even their terminology. Alternative marketplaces, right? But asking significant fees from devs. This is very important here, right? So basically, the likes of Epic will be able to now put the Epic Game Store on iOS, provided they have like a $1 million like credit, so they can show Apple that they have some liquidity, so they are not coming in to just scam users. Apple will actually control those, right? What apps basically qualify to be alternative app marketplaces. But then when it comes to the alternative marketplaces, the apps that you download from them, those are actually like completely subject to that alternative marketplace. Apple could, in theory, try to block certain alternative marketplaces if they are very much known for fraud or anything. But I believe that, for example, if like an alternative marketplace wants to offer you like adult apps, right? Apple would not be able to stop that based on the European legislation here. And there will also be new APIs and tools that enable developers to offer their iOS apps for download from alternative marketplaces. This will also help users in the settings app basically set up their default marketplace. New frameworks and APIs for creating alternative app marketplaces. So this is for installing apps, managing updates, and more. New frameworks and APIs for alternative browser engines. This goes into the fact that Safari is designated as a gatekeeper, which means Apple has to let go from their WebKit mandate for browser apps. on the App Store. This is not for alternative marketplaces, but basically Chrome can bring a Chromium-based Chrome application, and Microsoft can bring a Chromium-based Edge application onto the App Store. I believe Apple will have some guidelines for the provider of that web app to be still relatively credible, but overall, yes, if you do use some kind of other browser engine than WebKit, you can now use it in your own app and still publish it through the App Store. Interoperability request form, where developers can submit additional requests for interoperability with iPhone and iOS hardware and software features. I'll actually be interested to see what that looks like in the end. It goes on. As I said, I'm covering the controversies here, but there is some good stuff. So that browser engine stuff, now I do prefer WebKit. Generally, I feel it's the best optimized browser engine for ARM chips. However, Chromium does have its advantages. A lot on the web is getting written for Chromium specifically. So in my opinion, it's good to have that option. It will have some repercussions in terms of potentially battery life and stuff like that, but I do believe it's manageable, and it doesn't change Safari from the get-go. If you want to use Safari, it will still be the premier place for a WebKit. Bad Wolfie, 3 things bad in my opinion. The technology core fees, agreed. The $1 million for creating a store, it depends. I think that the $1 million is somewhat feasible. I think if they had site loading in general, and we'll talk about that a little later on, that $1 million, it's not even really a deposit. I believe it's like a liquidity claim from the bank. It's not too much to ask. And the imposed notarization and its security checks, even for third party. Yes, I believe that the notarization in of itself is actually a really fantastic thing to make sure that overall apps are secure and private. But I do believe there should be a button where where you as an end user can just say, I don't want I want to install this, even though it's not notarized. Maybe it's your own app, right? And you even don't want to work with it through like Xcode. Maybe you just put it on GitHub, you download it again or something like that. In general, I agree with all of those things. There's some nuance to stuff like the store creation, deposit or liquidity claim. The core technology fee is my main problem with all of this, so I absolutely agree on that. And the notarization can be nuanced, but in general, I do agree that notarization cannot be a mandatory for anything that you install. I believe notarization is a nice perk, and it's great that Apple wants to have a more robust notarization system. Macs do have that too. Most apps on the web get some kind of form of notarization. That way, if you install something from a really untrusted source, what happens, macOS will tell you that, and then you can still choose if you want to install it or not, and that is what I want to see on iOS as well. But both of you are basically agreeing with me. Yes, just as in macOS, you can go to the settings and open the app even unsigned. Yes, we are absolutely in agreement here for. Now, some positive things, right? We've talked about some negatives. For one, Apple will be opening up their NFC tag in the iPhone, so you can install third-party contactless payment applications. There will be some downsides for it, like I believe that a lot of other wallet functionality will not work once that happens, and but I don't believe that this will be like the first priority for the EU to come swooping in and then change that. There are also just some global changes, like the fact that Apple now allows cloud gaming apps like xCloud, for example, where you can see the entire library of the game of that service, and it doesn't have to be offered as individual apps apps on the App Store. So that is quite positive. I have always said that cloud gaming and emulators are like the two things that I'm missing from the App Store. Unfortunately, emulators have not yet been changed in terms of like what is allowed on the App Store. There are a couple of other apps, such as mini apps, that Apple now allows. Oh, by the way, I do want to cover this. iPad, right? iPad is not included in any of this, right? Because, according to Apple, iOS and iPadOS are separate. Question mark, exclamation point. Now, I find this very, very weird. Not because I don't believe in some of the separate nature of iOS and iPadOS, but simply because I do not believe that it's fair to separate them, given that Apple has actually a bigger tablet market share than they do iPhone. I believe it's a very, very similar OS in general, and I do believe that even though iPads sell less in general, I do believe that it should be subject to these regulations, and I'm probably gonna write the EU an email about this, but let's see. Notarization allowed to ban a deaf and prevent normal user to open it. Yeah, that's how notarization should work. It basically gives you like a benefit of the doubt. If you are notarized, you as a consumer would in general trust that app, but even if it's not notarized, you can still choose to trust it by yourself. Or if you are very unsure and you see that it's not notarized, it's one extra reason to basically avoid it, right? One extra reason. So this is where we go to the next and already is a much noticed thing, and that is notarization is required for an app to be downloaded. Now, I don't see how that can stand, because this goes so much against the spirit of this, right? We go into what this was created for, right? It is about comprehensively regulating gatekeepers' power over the largest digital companies. It's basically about creating more competition on the market. It's creating more opportunities for smaller developers, right? If you actually see like they don't. You can actually see that there is very little here about necessarily like how they can prevent stuff, right? Apple, in theory, I believe, is in compliance with these do's and don'ts, but I do believe that this goes so much against the spirit of this legislation that, as they said, they will dynamically update the obligations for gatekeepers when necessary, and I fully believe that they very much plan to like tell Apple go fuck themselves on certain things here. Did I write iPadOS wrong? Wait, what did I write wrong about it? I mean, it's a big O and a big S, which is not correct, right? I believe, but it's all right. iPad not included because iOS and iPadOS are separate. So notarization is required. Did I write notarization wrong? Look up notarization. What's wrong with me today? Guys, I swear, like I have a Cambridge C2 certificate. I'm quite fluent in English. Notarization. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think I'm just going insane. So, notarization for iOS apps, a baseline review that applies to all apps. Now, this is important. Notarizations are not the same as reviews. In theory, if you, as I said before, you have an adult app, right, that is from a developer that is in general registered and trusted, and it doesn't have malware, for example, then it will still be notarized, right? This is not a review in the same sense as there are reviews for the App Store. This does not have to comply with any of the of the stuff that Apple enforces for developers internally. In theory, it could even use like third-party APIs and stuff like that. I don't know how much Apple will go ham on this, but judging by how notarization works for the Mac, this is one thing where I believe it sounds a little worse than it will actually be. Um, so it's a baseline review that applies to all apps, regardless of their distribution channel, focus on platform integrity and protecting user. It involves a combination of automated checks and human review. I believe most of this will be handled automatically. However, human review will, I believe, apply in doubt. Basically, sorry, I wasn't clear. I just meant to say that I hadn't noticed that iPadOS was not included in Apple's announcement. Yes, this I believe this was like an article on Mac Rumors or something like that. Which, oh, by the way, I wanted to open this. Yeah. Yeah. So iPadOS is not included in this, as far as I know. Bad Wolf is sorry, I'm French and my English ain't the best, bro. Your English is completely fine. Don't worry here. App install. No, I thought I had written iPadOS wrongly, right? So I can actually look that briefly up. Maybe I'm wrong. iPadOS EU. Wait, doesn't say that it's like. Well, it says iOS and iPadOS does have a different. Yeah, so there is an iPhone iPad split, right? So yeah, this is unfortunately happening. Even though I would argue the iPad would benefit more from side loading than the iPhone, and I wouldn't be surprised if like in the next year or two the iPad gets like included. I believe some of the things like alternative marketplaces having to pay a fee will be very quickly dealt with by the European Union. I believe notarization might take a little longer depending on their own interpretation of their own law, and then something like the inclusion of iPad potentially will take a little longer than that. But yeah, there is definitely a split between iPhone and iPad here, unfortunately. So there will be app installation sheets. They will basically give you some information from the notarization process about the developer, the app, and basically some app store like information with screenshots and other essential information, which I assume could be like privacy and security related stuff. That actually is the best thing about notarization. This is why I believe that notarization should be heavily encouraged but not completely forced onto developers. Apple will be the ones authorizing marketplace developers. Now, this is very important because there is no site loading, right? There's no site loading whatsoever in the traditional sense. Because to me, a site loading is from the browser, right? From whatever you get, like a file that should be compatible, right? An exe file for Windows or for iPhone, it should be an IPA file. But you cannot just have an IPA file in your Files app. I already tried it. No site loading through browser, right? Only through those alternative marketplaces. And I believe that this is actually in compliance. I believe this is a controversy, definitely, because I believe a lot of people expected site loading to happen. But when we actually go through the do's and don'ts, you'll actually see that they have like a lot of stuff about like third parties to interoperate. That is not that relevant here. Data accessing, advertising access. Where is that? Where it's like third party marketplaces basically. It basically asks for third-party marketplaces. It does not ask for site loading in the traditional sense, which I believe is a shortcoming actually of the Digital Markets app. And I do believe that Apple is smartly going only with alternative marketplaces that are verified, and trying to enact some control on those individual companies, because if site loading was allowed from the browser, then basically notarization would be their last hurrah, and if the EU forces them to either get rid of notarization or to make it completely optional, then allowing site loading from the browser would basically make iOS a completely open system in the same way that macOS is. And this is why they do not have this in any way, shape, or form. It's all about alternative marketplaces, and their apps have to be notarized as well. Basically, Apple tries to keep this as small as possible, but I do believe that fundamentally this goes against the spirit of the law, and that the EU will, as they're saying here, dynamically update the obligations for gatekeepers when necessary. And I believe that Google has actually done the best job with their third-party site loading stuff by basically creating a scary information sheet, right, that tells you, oh, site-loaded apps are not subject to Google Play Store regulations, you cannot use your payment services, blah, blah, blah. And I believe Apple should do the exact same thing and then be fine with almost everything else, because I believe once you have this, the European can complain far less about everything that you mandate, because those mandates would basically be business partner deals, right? While if you don't offer site loading, then all of those things are subject to the law. This is how I interpret it. Whereas if you allow site loading, then everyone who still wants to be like basically an authorized Apple third-party marketplace or an Apple notarized app, they would be subject to all the whims that Apple could ever have, in my opinion. So let's continue with what Apple offers here. So those marketplace developers will have to be verified, and as smartly pointed out by Bed Wolfie, they have to basically prove that they have like at least $1 million on hand. This can go into problem, definitely not for the Epic Game Store, but for example for like Alt Store, which is like the store managed by Riley Testa, the guy who does the Delta emulator, which is a really, really great emulator. I don't know if there are problems there in like having that kind of money showing. There are also additional malware protections that prevent iOS apps from launching. This is usually, though, pretty typical for any modern operating system. Obviously, with App Store apps, those are completely authorized. While sure, the security measures of iOS will still be in place, they're technically not even that necessary with App Store apps, but with third-party downloaded stuff, they'll basically be read by a gatekeeper-like solution on iOS, and then it can tell you if there's malware and then refuse to open it. So Apple points out that they have less ability to address other risks like apps that contain scams, fraud, and abuse. They do kind of say that privacy and security will be mostly protected because obviously the way your data is read is managed by APIs on iOS itself, and security is managed by stuff like, well, on Mac it would be Gatekeeper. I don't know if Apple has like a name for it on iOS, right? But for example, if the app does have illicit, objectionable, harmful, or I would say illegal content, especially, this is where it can get into problems. And when it comes to alternative browser engines, other than Apple's WebKit, those may negatively affect the user experience, including system performance and battery life. I would also add like RAM management, which does also play into the first two, which Chromium is kind of known for. So Apple is very like unwillingly to complying here, but they're doing still a lot. But we are now at already 4 pretty major controversies. I do believe they will mostly be able to get away with asking for a commission for external payment providers when something is still managed through the App Store. I do not believe that the iOS things here are really there's any way for Apple to not go into conflict with the European Union about these things. For one, the fees they are charging are not only there, which is already problematic, but they are extremely high. Notarization is a little bit of a gatekeeping element, which kind of goes against the spirit of the law and even the letter, where Apple is explicitly like categorized as a gatekeeper, and there's no site loading through the browser, which, yes, I don't know if it's technically in the legislation, but the EU could amend the legislation here. And when it comes to Safari, I actually think that Apple has mainly done a good job here. So Safari will be able to be replaced as your default browser. It's a little bit similar to what Windows had to do when they had like 98% market share with Internet Explorer. And I don't actually believe that this will be rolled out worldwide. So when it comes to the App Store, there's also, of course, changes to developers. And one major thing comes here. And this is where we have to really talk about the core technology fee, right? The core technology fee, in my opinion, is the biggest poison pill inside all of this. And it's language that I usually don't like using because I have a very nuanced opinion on a lot of subjects. I usually am pretty positive on Apple because I kind of understand where they're coming from. But with the core technology fee, there's really no excuse, and I'll go into detail later on. First off, let's start with some positive, right? iOS apps on the App Store will pay a reduced commission of either 10%. This is instead of the 15% commission that developers currently paying, right? However, that would mostly include the 3% fee. So that in theory still sounds lower than the 15%. What is even more special is that when it comes to like the 30%, this is when it goes into 17%. And now you would say, wait, with a 3% fee, that's only 20%. How is that possible? Well, the reason why is, first of all, that 3% fee is a payment processing fee, which is quite reasonable. And it's currently basically included in what Apple does with their 30% fee. This is, for example, why if in the United States you're trying to use an external payment provider, Apple will still charge you a 27% commission because you're basically foregoing a 3% fee that Apple believes to be part of their own commission usually. But then you have to pay money to that payment provider and stuff like that. So you usually end up paying more than if you just had kept going through the App Store. Now then comes the core technology fee. And this is the biggest problem. iOS apps distributed from the App Store and on an alternative app marketplace will pay 50 cents. And this is a big issue for me because when I originally read that article or this explanation, I was very positive on it because I took it to be 5 cents, right? I skimmed it over and I somehow took it to be 5 cents, which still is a fee, right? But it's manageable. Now you pay that fee for a first annual install per year over 1 million threshold. So that means if you're offering an app, be it on the App Store under those reduced commissions, or on a third-party marketplace, right? And you pay nothing for 1 million downloads. And then on your 1 millionth and one download, you pay 50 cents. And so on and so forth for all downloads, even if you get 1 billion of them in the year. And that really, really grinds my gears because Apple themselves wrote something, core technology fee calculator. Apple themselves knew that this would be so difficult to understand and probably so unbelievable that they created a calculator that developers can use to understand how much they would be paying. I'm sure the exceeding 1 million users will make developers company very reluctant to release their apps outside the App Store. Yeah, this is absolutely, especially if you like imagine like a freemium app, which they have like very low average like revenue from from like individual users. Usually it's like the whales that pay a lot and they offset the fact that others are still like using the service. But now imagine if in addition to having to run the server for like your big freemium app, you also now have to pay Apple 50 cents for every download that happens there. Now let's say okay, we have a digital goods or service in our iOS app. Let's say we make $1 million a year, right? It's not completely unheard of, right? Let's even say we are part of the Apple Small Business Program, right? That means we're subject to smaller fees, right? So let's say we have just 100,000 downloads, right? Let's calculate it with the new one, right? Oh, that sounds reasonable. For 1 million, you pay Apple $10,000. Now, you can argue, should you have to pay Apple anything? But okay, right? Under the new one, the App Store commission is $12,500. Because under the old commission, you're paying 15% rather than the 10%. So in this specific case, right, you're saving some money, okay? But but it's very unlikely for an app that makes $1 million to actually only have 100,000 downloads. It's much more likely that we would have 1 million downloads. And look at that. Nothing changes because 1 million downloads is actually free. Now, this is where the magic happens though, right? We have 1,000,001 downloads. Now, Apple rounds this up, so this should be 50 cents, but it becomes $1. I believe if I type in 2, yeah, it still stays at 1. But imagine if what happens if we are now at 2 million downloads. Oh my God, why is it this way? 2 million downloads. Now we are paying Apple $45,000 in a core technology fee, while if you are looking at old things, you're still paying $12,500 because guess what? Those old rules are only based on a revenue share model, right? 30 or 15%. If we are at 30%, it's obviously twice as high. There's nothing too crazy here. And then if we go here, right, if we are not actually member of the small business program, we're paying more in the App Store commission, but not actually more in the core technology fee. So this is only really better for extremely small developers who don't even have plans to like grow very quickly. They don't even want like a surprise success because suddenly they will have to end up paying something crazy. But this even isn't even that true, right? For $1 million for $1 million, if you have like a freemium app that doesn't cost anything up front, you probably might have to do something like crazy, like 10 million downloads, right? Because that isn't actually too crazy. That just means that out of the 10 million, you only get $1 from 1/10 of them, or you get 10 cents from each of them. That's pretty likely. In fact, you could get like 5 million of those people to actually not pay you anything. And then you have like 2 million that pay you a little, then 2 million that pay you a little more than that, and then like 1 million that pays you actually somewhat decent stuff. But now you're paying, this is monthly, by the way, you're now paying $425,000. This is so insane to me. Look, while on the old one, you're still paying $25,000. This is so bad. Like, and I cannot believe that they made this calculator because this is so insulting. Yeah, this is euro, by the way. I really cannot believe this because this is like the difference is so stark. It's literally 20 times more money. Okay, it's 18 times more money. I apologize. This is insane. Or imagine an individual that develops an open source app with no monetization at all, exactly, and creates a buzz for one reason or another, and they have 2 million users. It will be very expensive. Yeah, let's actually go through that. Let's say it's a completely free, like, mini app, right? It's maybe it has one cool AI feature, right? But it's otherwise completely free, right? So this developer makes nada, right? Now but they have like 2 million downloads, right? This is what you've suggested. Look, they pay nothing under the old rules. Granted, under the old rules, they probably wouldn't be able to get that app into the App Store. and then see what happens with the new capabilities and terms. Now you have to pay Apple $42,000 monthly, not annually, to offer an app for free on an alternative marketplace or the App Store, and this is what you get. You see the difference here? This is antitrust. This is anti-competitive. This is ludicrous because it doesn't scale in any reasonable fashion. Apple could have made something egregious by charging you an average 10% more with the new capabilities or something like that. They could have said, oh, we cap it at like 32% or 17% instead of 30 or 15%. And that already would be egregious. But you know what they did? They were like, yeah, you know what? You'll just keep paying us money and more and more. Like, you want your app to succeed? Your app has like 10 million downloads in the first year, but it's a completely free small app? Yeah, you fucking loser. Pay us 375 grand a month. This is 100% unacceptable. This should never be allowed to stand this way. And the problem with this is what you actually are pointing out, right, Wolfie, here is it's infinite, right? Yes, Apple is arguing for a revenue share model in with the old style, right? But the difference here is that revenue share is from a revenue that is actually generated, right? Here, Apple wants you to pay a fee on potentially non-generated revenue. They know this. They could have made an exception for this, right? They could have said, whatever it does not scale beyond asking 30% of your income, right? They could have said this, but they don't, because this is how they want to scare people off. Because if their cap was 30% for this, then everybody would subscribe to the new capabilities and terms, but with, like, in theory, something as low as 10 and 17%, but then for the old one, they would do. You are paying 30 and 15% overall if you are generating money. But if you're not generating money, then Apple at least is not penalizing you. While here, they definitely are. And you have to understand, right? When I originally read it, I thought it would be 5 cents, which is still a lot, actually. It should probably be half a cent or something like that. But when you actually look at it, right? I tried to go by 1/10, right? But let's just say, like, even let's just say 2 million, right? Right? If it was somewhere around this, you could not in monthly fees, maybe in annual fees. But this is so bad. I honestly have no idea how they are planning to go to deal with it. I believe that the European Commission will just say, yeah, that just doesn't work for us, buddies. Drop it down to 0.5 cents, not 0.5 euros. Maybe we'll talk about it. Or just completely get rid of it. You have no right to this money. You have created the platform, sure, you have created the App Store. You will still get millions of app sales. You are still selling your hardware at incredible profit. You're selling other services such as Apple Music and iCloud. We have actually not enforced too many changes, like sure, NFC and third-party engine browsers, but you have no right to this. And I fully agree with this. This is ludicrous. This is my biggest problem here. And I will fight this, and I would love to help developers fight this. If some kind of developer wants to come on and talk about this, some kind of developer that preferably isn't Spotify or Facebook or something like that, but like a small dev who actually fears for their livelihood with this stuff, I would love to give you some coverage here. Beyond that, so the reduced commission becomes worthless, right? Because you would much rather pay 15% flat or 30% flat than 17 and 10% with an added 3% payment processing fee and then whatever that bullshit is supposed to be, right? So you can actually see Apple has a fee calculator tool that we have used extensively right now, and there's the developer support page that goes into a lot more detail. Again, I will not be breaking this down too much. There are a lot of APIs, a lot of stuff for data. There's a new choice screen in Safari, so this is what reminds me most about like the Windows situation with Internet Explorer. And then for the App Store, everything from alternative payment providers and stuff like that. And then if you're trying to do alternative distribution, there are rules here. I believe that they also operating an alternative marketplace, so they actually have some guidelines for this as well. So you will have to you'll have like info sheets similar to that, and Apple asks for like that $1 million liquidity. Here it is. Oh, by the way, it's 1 million euros, not dollars. Provide Apple a standby letter of credit from an A-rated or equivalent S&P, Fitch, or Moody's financial institution of 1 million euros, or establish adequate financial means in order to guarantee support for your developers and users. I think to establish, sorry, not or. So you basically have to have 1 million either in the bank, or the bank would basically guarantee you that kind of payment. The most ironic thing is that Apple complains that Qualcomm charges them a fixed fee for every iPhone sold that uses their 5G chip, and now they're doing the same to us. There is one counter though here, and Apple is not complaining that loudly, right? I mean, Apple is trying to deal with it with Qualcomm, but fundamentally I actually do believe that Apple believes in the entitlement of big companies to ask for their shit. They just believe that they also have the power to negotiate. And in fact, I would actually not put it past them to potentially give like an Amazon or something like that, either a reduced commission or a very lenient notarization process, right? Because similar to how they allow those developers to pay a reduced fee right now because they are so important they cannot afford to lose them from the App Store, I do believe that they will make deals with big entities. However, I do not care about the big entities. I care about smaller developers way more, right? Between like the bourgeois and the proletariat, I'm way more of a proletariat kind of guy. So Apple has a ton of rules for those third-party marketplaces. Again, it's I don't think I have it in me to go through all of this today, but I do believe that overall this is the one thing, right? And when we actually go to demanding 1 million, I don't have euros on this. That's weird. 1 million, what is it for? Letter of credit. So this could be potentially prohibitive for smaller players, and this is in the most critical sense, this is anti-competitive because this basically prevents small players from becoming bigger players, right? Granted, 1 million isn't usually that huge of a hurdle if you want to open like something as relevant as like a big third-party marketplace, but maybe you want to have a third-party marketplace just to distribute 3 or 4 apps. That becomes a very different issue. And then of course you then become also subject to this ridiculous fees. Third-party markets will also have to pay the core fees. I think yes, the core fees is for the new is for the new model, right? With the reduced commission, because look, this is under just business terms, right? They do not say that this is and this is for the App Store, but the core technology fee is for App Store and on alternative app marketplace, right? So this is why they have it so high, because they cannot guarantee a revenue flow in the realm of 10 or 17%. However, there is a chance here that, for example, if you are a third-party dev, right, you would have to pay like a 10, 20, 30 20% fee to the third-party marketplace, unless you're like Fortnite on the Epic Game Store. And then you also have to pay that 50% thing on every annual install per year, which is, by the way, calculated against like an account, right? So Apple can track this, how often you download an app per year. This is where that comes from. I don't even know if they collect that data. I just know they can analyze it. For every installation of app on the third-party store, yeah, I do believe so. So yeah, this is pretty hardcore. This also means, by the way, that Apple wants to have basically an unlimited understanding of the data from those third-party marketplaces. So those, in essence, will not will be able to compete that well, because Apple will have to know basically everything about them. I don't know if the EU likes that, because when you actually look at it, right, the don'ts prevent users from uninstalling, track end users outside of Gatekeeper's core platform for the purpose of targeted advertisement. However, this would be targeting, just not for advertisement. Yeah, so, and this also makes like their own service more easily digestible for consumers than the third-party one, and I believe this goes against this. Yeah, so there's a lot here, and this doesn't even scratch the surface and all the kind of stuff that Apple has like for this. So the core technology fee, this is how Apple says it. First of all, let's start with something positive. When will Apple waive your fee? Marketplace developers who are non-profit organizations, accredited educational institutions, or government entities based in the EU and approved for a fee waiver are exempt from the Apple Developer Program annual membership and the core technology fee. This applies to developers of marketplace apps and other apps. Please note that marketplace developers approved for the fee waiver can only distribute apps from developers who have also been provided for the fee waiver. Okay, that makes some internal sense. But then the core tech fee. The DMA requires Apple to support distribution and payment processing alternatives that are facilitated outside the App Store. To reflect the value Apple provides marketplace developers with ongoing investments in developer tools, technologies, program services, Apple has introduced a core tech fee. Marketplace developers will need to pay 50 cents, not 5 cents, not 0.5 cents, but 50 cents for each first annual install of their marketplace app. First annual installs included in your Apple Developer Program membership can be used for marketplace apps. Marketplace developers and app developers that distribute on alternative marketplaces who are approved for the fee waiver are exempt for the fee. Can you imagine how little money you collect thanks to this? And then you also have to pay fee taxes for every installation. Yeah, we've gone through this. Supporting developers and users. Yeah, sure. So this has been my analysis of the law, basically in like the most basic terms. What Apple is enforcing right now, or is going through it with iOS 17.4. It's a month until this will all come actually into effect, only starting in March. So I highly even assume that 17.4 will not even offer most of the functionality as we go through the development with like the betas. I believe that all the notarization and stuff will only come into effect starting in March. And then Apple has a ton of developer documentation here that I've also outlined. This also goes into more detail on some of the more positive stuff, like opening up the NFC frameworks, offering like third-party browser engines, and stuff like that. Now, there are obviously other people beyond me who are criticizing this. For one, And what is 95 Max saying? Well, according to the Coalition for App Fairness, which includes companies such as Microsoft, who are running Xbox, a completely closed-off ecosystem, Apple's third-party App Store plan is a shameless insult and must not stand. Tim Sweeney called it, said their implementation of the Digital Markets app was like full of junk fees and still gave them too much control. And while I was overall against legislation like the Digital Markets app in this specific form, I have to kind of agree for it. The Coalition for App Fairness say that this is basically like Apple not having any intention to comply with the DMA at all. People are widely saying that this will put Apple into court with the EU, or the EU will basically just give them the equivalent of like a government-based cease and desist, and if they don't comply with that, then it will end up in court. And just what I've done, others have started calculating here what this can result in. So we've actually done basically that exact same calculation. So if you have 2 million downloads, but you actually don't generate any revenue, which by the way does happen, a ton of utility apps are either completely free or very low cost, or they rely on pretty unpredictable support through stuff like Patreon. So that's what's happening, unfortunately, for them, and if this would completely bankrupt them. Bad Wolfie, I'm thinking more and more about sending a message to the EU, SMI by the way, but I don't know which department to contact or who to speak to alert them to my fears, which are probably shared by many developers. Bad Wolfie, are you a developer, or are you just like me and basically seeing their complaints? Because they do further information in questions and answers. Contact the DMA team. Here, dude. I think you can do this. Yeah. So I'll probably share like this link later on somewhere, but I just encourage you to go to the website and basically contact them and write whatever is on your heart. And I think I might do the same, and I will actually talk about stuff like the core technology fee, and if you have like even more insight into stuff like notarization and how that could negatively impact developers, feel free to write that too. I think that it's very important to point out that the core tech fee would effectively often charge more than the 30% that Apple would charge through the App Store, and it even is capable of charging people who don't generate any revenue at all, which that is okay, right? If you have like a $100 annual like developer fee for like Xcode and stuff, I'm completely fine with that, right? I don't think that people who only create free apps should be exempt from those $100. I don't think those $100 are too punitive. I think the value that Apple provides there is more than enough. It's not just Xcode, obviously, but it's also access to betas. It's stuff like CloudKit, with you in general also having some access to some free cloud services by Apple. So I don't mind that, but when we move into the like $40,000 per month range, this is when when it really gets to me. You're a developer but not an iOS one. I don't think this should really hinder you from commenting on this, because if you could even say like, I'm a developer that for the long term has not developed for iOS, maybe for those and those reasons. Maybe you could say for like the commission reasons or whatever, or maybe because of Apple's restrictive rules on what actually goes into the App Store or not. And you could say, well, now if I wanted to publish something on myself, for one, I would have to find one of those third-party marketplaces, which could make you subject to a fee from an alternative provider like an Epic Game Store, and you wouldn't even be able to publish something through the browser. But now you would also have to pay a core technology fee. You would have to make sure that your app is notarized, and if you try to open like your own digital marketplace, you would have to have €1 million letter of credit from a big bank. So that is highly, highly problematic. So Mac Rumors goes on to point out that this could especially bankrupt free or freemium app developers. As I said, obviously a free app, like a low utility app. Yeah, definitely a freemium app depends a little bit on just how much revenue you collect. Like on average per user, it would basically have to be higher than 50%, than 50 cents per user. And if you go through like a third party marketplace that also asks, like, let's say a 10-15% commission from you, then now you would have to be like in the 60-70 cent range. And once you are there, you also have to think about paying taxes and what are actually your operating expenses. And now you're very, very much likely to go into the negatives. I believe this is only good for extremely small developers, which, I mean, sure, there are probably plenty of developers that have like less than 100,000 to maybe 200,000 downloads a year. And if you happen to have like an alternative app store that maybe does not actually ask a commission from you, that's definitely money saved over publishing on the App Store. Also a chance to avoid Apple's restrictive guidelines. But once you hit that for a million, once you hit especially that second million, which obviously is when you would have to pay 500,000 overall based on that, this goes completely into antitrust, into anti-competitive theory, and I don't think this is really relevant. Bad Wolf, the already existing $100 a year for developer prevented me to develop seriously in iOS. I know for a company it's not that much, but for me it's much for doing little apps with few downloads. Well, yeah, it depends a little bit on what you actually want to do on iOS, and if you don't have like a long-term like monetization plan for those, it might not be worth it. I would argue if you really want to make a name for yourself, it's definitely worth it. But I mean, I've invested as much into like my YouTube shit here and more. But I would argue, yeah, if you don't see much potential, maybe your app is like not really something that iOS users are looking for, then yeah, I absolutely understand why it's also like you have to learn to program for iOS, right? It's different if you work with Swift and if you work with like Apple's APIs, if you work with their tools, you would have to also invest time in it. And if you also have to invest money in it, you also have to have a Mac for it. I fully understand how that can become like a burden here. So yeah, this is basically my very low level breakdown, my very like first impressions analysis almost. And the one thing that I want to add before I start wrapping this up a little, because my voice is getting a little hoarse and I want to make even more content on this, and that is what I wanted to happen, right? Because I am actually a person who does not believe that every platform should be completely open, that asking a commission from developers is completely unreasonable. I, as a consumer, have always preferred Apple's more strict guidelines for the App Store, no third-party APIs, a relatively strict like review process, and sure, yeah, that costs developers certainly, but I as a consumer ultimately am only beholden to myself, and if it works to me and it doesn't completely bleed out the developers, right, I am mostly fine. This is how it works, unfortunately. However, what I wanted to happen, right, were 2 to 3 things. The first one is a mandated lower commission, right? Now, Apple did lower the commission. However, with that core technology fee and with the payment processing fee on top, those are not effectively lower. So that unfortunately is out of the question. Even though Apple lowered the commission, it's not an effectively lower commission because the fee then comes into effect. My mandated lower commission expectations were around 20%. That does include like the payment processing fee. It does not have any fee at all in terms of like how many downloads you have. So this is basically like that, actually pretty similar to what actually Apple has here. Where is it? Right, it's like it's the 17% they ask here plus the 3% fee, but completely without this. And I actually think that the developers would be pretty happy. So 20% instead of 30, and maybe around like 12%. Instead of 15. This is for developers with lower that are subject to the small business program. As far as I know, it's hard to make a profit for anyone running a big marketplace like this below the 12%. So there's also not much reason to really take that much money from smaller devs who really need to grow. And then when you look at some of the giants that Apple has on the App Store, there's still a lot of profit to be had. However, what is like a reasonable 10% reduction for developers, right, would effectively lower Apple's profit from this, or like overall revenue, by 30%, and their profit would probably be halved. Now, Apple definitely does not like to see that happen, right? But I believe this would be a significant shift in money distribution and be a long-term success for a more not even a more competitive landscape, but I would just say a more fair landscape. With like all the layoffs that we are seeing from Google, Microsoft, across all gaming companies and stuff like that, I do believe that even like a 10% change in revenue from one of the largest stores worldwide would actually be a meaningful change for many developers. What else? What else did I want? I wanted an independent. What is independent? Okay. Arbitration committee. To basically oversee App Store rules and to suggest and maybe even enact changes. Wait. Okay, yeah. The idea here would be that Apple sometimes very unevenly enforces their own reviews. And my suggestion is, if a developer creates like a complaint about the review process, right, I believe it should first go to Apple themselves and see if they can change that. And then it would go on the next round to an independent arbitration committee that is basically like a higher court, not quite necessarily a Supreme Court. That would be still up to the larger governing bodies. And that arbitration committee would basically fight something like Apple not allowing cloud gaming apps right before yesterday. And you can see how arbitrary that rule was, because Apple obviously was able to change it on a whim, basically, and they changed it worldwide, not even just in the European Union. So, and with that arbitration committee, I also wanted a more open app store, right? That goes into things that I mentioned time and time again, primarily like cloud gaming apps and emulators, but it would also encompass stuff like mini apps, which Apple now claims to allow, but I'm still a little skeptical. Basically, when we're talking about like a widget-only app, we are talking about like a system utility app in a way, like all those Mac tools that go into like the status bar on top. I would want this to be then also be handled by that committee that basically tells Apple, no, you cannot prohibit this or that thing, right? But what I wanted to happen, right, iOS stays closed for maximum security for maximum privacy. I believe that even like Epic Games could not complain with like a 20% fee, a 20% commission rate. I believe smaller developers would never really get a better deal than 12% here, because sure, maybe like somebody else offers them like 10 or 8%, but nobody is as big as the App Store. So would you rather have 12% of $1 million, or would you rather have 8% of $100,000, right? And with that committee, I believe there would be like more trust in the process overall. With fewer rules to enforce, the review process would actually get a little less complicated for Apple and also for developers to understand it. iOS stays closed, so Apple still makes money. Consumers still feel the most amount of trust in like the wider ecosystem. It doesn't change their user behavior. Nobody has to go sideload apps and stuff like that. And maybe we get like dev mode with sideloading, right? This would be only for like registered devs. Apple could ask for that $100 a year. If you want to do sideloading, basically the idea would be, oh, maybe those are like your own apps, right? But as I said before, maybe you just don't want to go through Xcode. Maybe you want to just download the app you already have created on GitHub or something like that. I believe this could be a long-term option, right? But this was fundamentally what I wanted to happen. However, what I want to happen now is proper compliance with the DMA, right? I want Apple to not be malicious about it. I don't want them to do it in this half-assed way. I really want them to see the letter of the law, the spirit of the law, and go about it, right? So no core tech fee at all, or lowered by 90% or more. Right, so 5 cents, maybe even 99%, right? But it should not be anywhere near as high as it currently is. Notarization is optional and good, but it cannot be but not mandatory, right? You can still download apps that are not notarized, and you can manually choose to install it. What did I write wrong? Oh yeah, mandatory. And the last one is site loading. Proper site loading, because I believe that if you have third-party marketplaces, you're only putting smaller developers at the whims of other large companies, or either site loading or no 1 million letter of credit. Right? This way you could create like potentially like your own marketplace for your own app. But in theory, I do want, like without notarization, you also wouldn't really be subject to most of those things. So that would already get rid of a lot of things. So I am for basically treat iOS and iPadOS like macOS. That's what I'm here for. I believe this is fundamentally the best thing for Apple going forward. I believe this will put them into the least problems with the European Union. And I believe over time, everything else they've done here, right? Allowing third-party browsers, opening up the NFC stuff, creating all those data sharing stuff, opening new APIs, having new rules for external payment service providers. I do believe that all of this can be a magnificent template for other regions, including the United States. However, with those controversies, right, especially with that core technology fee, which is the biggest problem in my opinion, because it's basically a bottomless money pit. Unfortunately, we cannot get that, but I believe with this law, we can pretty much get this. And while it would fundamentally uproot the nature of iOS, as long as I cannot get this, which I think would have been the best outcome for literally everyone, this is what I want to happen, and I want my iPhone to be basically like my Mac. I especially want my iPad to be like my Mac, and I want my Vision Pro at some point to be like my Mac. So this is basically, unfortunately, where we aren't. We definitely, unfortunately, are not here. But let's see. We still have a month. We'll have a lot of the European Union's power come into question here, right? As they say, they do have some remedies here, penalty payments, potentially enforcing a divestiture of parts of a business, even bigger fines and stuff like that. And if Apple doesn't want to comply with all of those things, they could potentially ban them from the European Union, which if we actually EU GDP, it's almost a $20 trillion economy in the European Union. Apple does not want to get rid of selling hardware here. They don't want to stop selling Apple Music, iCloud subscriptions. They don't want to stop running the App Store, right? Because the App Store doesn't go away. And I believe a lot of developers would still choose to go through the App Store. I believe that Apple would then, if this was all enforced, right, Apple would not offer those reduced commission rates. I mean, they could still try, but maybe very small devs would then take the core tech fee thing, but nobody else would. Any reasonably sized developer would not accept this. And if you actually think like about like a huge developer like Google, like of course they would still want everything to happen through the App Store. If outside the App Store they would have to have this ridiculous fee, their apps download like tens of millions of times every year. This would even be for them like a ridiculous financial punishment. So yeah, I believe if we get this, Apple can play around with this as much as they want, because it's now their own store and developers do have alternatives, and this should go away. I agree. macOS is pretty safe, and I would love the same system in iOS. Well, they're built on some of the same core ideas, right? Cocoa and basically like it's Unix, and now macOS is also ARM-based as well. So there is nothing technologically prohibitive. Hell, the iPhone 15 Pro has as much RAM as the MacBook Pro has in its base configuration, with a far leaner overall operating system. There is some virus from time to time on Mac, but not as much, because by default apps are notarized and unsigned apps don't launch. Yes, that's absolutely true. Also, as I said, if we had this, right, there's a good chance that a lot of people would just choose to download from the App Store. What did Google do, right? Google site loading, scary. Google scare screens. What are those scare screens, right? On Android, what do they say? They don't have a screenshot. Is there like something in images? Google Play services update the. No, that's not scary actually. Is there not like a good screenshot of this? What's this? By the way, this is also, by the way, why you need a good enforcement for all this stuff, right? Google will soon scan site-loaded Android apps for malicious code. Yeah, that should have kind of always been happening, right? Where is that? Google, does it have it here? No, but there was like this Android pop-up screen basically, and it was like super scary that we cannot guarantee your privacy or security with site loading apps, right? And there was even like a big punishment for Google with like $700 million because they went around with potential creators of other third-party marketplaces, and they basically paid them, or they highly encouraged them to not open up alternatives to the Google Play Store. So ironically, Apple has always been closed and kind of like proud about it. Google has always boasted, oh yeah, we are like vaguely based on Linux, we are super open, but then behind the backs of consumers, they've actually went to the likes of Samsung and said, look, you have like your couple apps on your store, how about you don't basically put on more on them? Does Google Play Protect already scan for installed apps, even APKs? Yeah, I believe it's has happened for quite a while. I don't know from when that article was that I read there, but I do believe it wasn't always quite the case, right? But it might have been like there for a decade or so. I'm not an expert. Wasn't there like this update? No, it's not scary, but there was like the scary one thing that I saw. And basically, like, because of this and because of going around to like potential competitors, Google was punished, and I agreed with that, and I believe that consumers should have the choice between either truly open platforms that, like Google, advertise themselves to be open, or more closed, more curated platforms, the way Apple has always advertised iOS. But yeah, by the way, I'm not claiming that Google in general is like unsafe. I know it's less safe than iOS, but I do not believe that these days it actually matters for consumers. It might have mattered in the day, sort of like Android 4. What was Android KitKat? Which version was that? Yeah, Android KitKat was Android 4. Yeah, I do remember that back in the days, Apple would even like have like a market share slide where they were like, oh, look, 97% of malware is on Android and not on iOS. And I believe that at that time, that was a very reasonable thing to point out. But these days, if you have a relatively modern device with decent support from both an OS perspective and the security patch perspective, there isn't that much you should be afraid of. Yeah, so guys, my voice is almost gone, and we're almost at, well, no, not at the 2 hour mark, but an hour and 45 minute mark almost. So we have covered a lot actually for the first video, and we've especially talked and calculated a lot around with the core technology fee. We've pointed out how much that of a problem can be, especially for free app developers and medium-sized app developers and freemium app developers. We have talked about how this is widely panned by things like the Coalition for App Fairness, but also developers, I believe, in general. The Apple has definitely put a lot of thought into this, and I actually would say almost too much when they made up shit like the core tech fee, but there's definitely some good stuff here, right? And I would probably want to close this with this good stuff, theoretically at least, right? It's opening up tech like NFC. Again, nobody forces you in this case. Then alternative browser engines. Again, nobody forces you to actually use those. And if you happen to happen upon an app, upon a website that might be fully built with Chromium in mind, you then could quickly download Chrome, use it there, and uninstall Chrome until you actually need it again, right? There's also like cloud gaming apps in the App Store now. right? There's also stuff like mini apps, which I do not fully understand. Some have pointed out that it could be basically like for small functionality, like even like beacon stuff, but I'm definitely not trying to talk about this. Yeah, so I want to let you out with some positive views here, but unfortunately, like Apple estimates that under 1% of developers would pay a core technology fee under their on their EU apps. I don't understand this. I actually don't know. Like, is there idea that most people would just choose to stay on the App Store, right? And basically, they wouldn't pay a core tech fee because they would not even accept those new terms, but would keep the old terms. Because this is a little weird, right? If 99% of developers would reduce or maintain the fees they currently have, so basically Apple's suggestion would be that only the smallest of developers would want to be subject to this, then my question is, why does it even matter, right? Why did you even put in the work for something that would apparently only hurt under 1%? And my idea is, if, for example, Google wants to publish a version of YouTube on iOS that you download externally, while still having a version on the App Store, because on that version they could forgo stuff like in-app purchases, right? Well, now suddenly, because they have such a highly downloaded app, this would exceed any amount of like in-app purchase fee commissions they would have to pay on their App Store app. So it would make no sense, which, sure, this is what Apple wants, but as I said, and this is how we get back to the very beginning, this goes against the spirit of the law, against the do's and don'ts of gatekeeper guidelines. And I do want proper compliance with the DMA by Apple. And I'm not afraid to say, if look, they've actually put this out before the law comes into effect. So there's a chance that they wouldn't even see any fees from this, right? Not 5%, no 10%, no divestiture, but they could basically get a stern warning from the EU and tell them, look, if you don't change that quickly, first we'll hit you with this, then we'll hit you with this, then we'll hit you with this a couple more times, then we'll hit you with this. Now, I don't think that it will come to that. I believe that at worst, by the time it comes to like a 10% punishment of their worldwide annual turnover, Apple would start fully complying. But it's not like they were punished by Denmark or something, right? And they accepted like a punishment there over and over again because it was so little money to them. But this is actually big money, and the shareholders would not excuse them to lose so much money in the pursuit of making some money that is highly likely to be illegal in this region these days. And this is where I want to let you go, because this is a law, right? And I am not a law absolutist, right? I don't believe that every law is moral. I don't believe that every law is like worth upholding. But this is a law that was actually created with a very good idea to increase competition, to take some power, some money away from big guys like Apple, Google, Amazon, Facebook, right? I don't think this is profoundly a bad idea. Now, would I have preferred this and then maybe just better taxation? Yeah, I would have. But unfortunately, for some reason, that ain't happening, because for one, this is actually harder to write into law for some reason. And then taxation laws are just completely horrible in general. So then we have to deal with hoping that something like this could happen. And even if like site loading does not happen, right, then still proper maintained third-party marketplaces with no need for notarization, no core tech fee would be such a big change that I believe I could live even if it doesn't come to iPadOS. if it I don't get full site loading and I have to like work with like the alt store app or something like that, I fully accept that. However, I do want at least some of that compliance to happen, right? I don't want to see developers like frantically calculate their potential like money stream to Apple because the core tech fee is so high. I don't want developers to fear that they will end up paying more than the 30% commission they otherwise would have paid. I don't want developers to potentially forgo the European Union entirely, maybe because they have like only an app that wouldn't even comply with Apple's App Store rules, but then it would be prohibitively expensive to publish it outside the App Store. Granted, obviously, the other regions don't have site loading mandates at all, but with how the DOJ works in the US, with how their antitrust agencies and their Congress are currently looking at Apple, there is a chance that we might get something. It could take like 5 years or so, though, something to change there about all of this stuff. But for now, this is what we have in the EU. Those are the problems that I see. Those are the good things that I see. This is what could have been, unfortunately didn't happen, and this is what I hope could happen now that Apple will be bumping heads with the European Union. I've laid out my heart for you. It was a long video. If you liked it, please consider subscribing, liking, sharing. Please consider supporting this channel directly. You can find my Patreon link in the description of this channel, or you can, if you are live, send a super chat or a super sticker, but you can also send a super thanks once a video has already been processed and up on the channel as a VOD. Beyond that, I'm just so incredibly humbled by your support with 83,000 subscribers, like 30,000 views on my last channel. We'll keep getting those live views a little higher, or I'll change my mind on doing live streams, but this was still very enjoyable for me. We're getting one last message from Bad Wolfie. Your live was very interesting and allowed me to confront my own thoughts with you. I really hope that you will do something about it. Thank you, Wolfie, Bad Wolfie, for being there, for chatting with us. I do believe you added quite a lot of value to my own inner thoughts, and this is why I always encourage people that are here to join the chat, join the discussion. I thank you as well for the discussion, for your contributions. I've pointed out how you can support me on this channel, but always just watching the videos is always appreciated as well. So I'll see you guys next time, probably with a video about this as well, or maybe some alternative topic that might have come up very quickly. I don't know. Hopefully my voice is also fully restored until then. I'll keep drinking a lot of water and staying hydrated. But until then, thank you guys so much. See you next time. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.